Where did COVID actually come from? Some new documents shed light on the so-called gain of function question. A stunning abortion decision in Latin America. And Britney Spears gets one step closer to freedom. Wednesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Wednesday, September 8th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hi, Carlo.
Woo. Oh, I missed that voice, Jill. The gang is all back. Good to see you. Shana Tova, by the way, did you have a Happy New Year?
Yes, I did. Thank you so much. And it's still going, actually. And then we've got Yom Kippur next week. But yes, thank you so much.
A busy time. Well, anyway, it was great to see you last week. Jill and I got together with the little kiddies at Jill's place. It was awesome. My daughter was crying and miserable the whole time. But it was great to see you guys. It was great to see Alex. She's looking amazing, and it was just good to see you.
I know. It's nice to see each other outside of work.
Yes.
And we don't even see each other at work. I mean,
yes.
it was nice
outside
to actually see you in person and meet
yes.
little Francesca, who, even while crying, is still extremely cute. So good job to you and Becky.
Thank you. And by the way, one plug before we get started today. Jill and I did a podcast a couple weeks ago that has just been published. It's with a company called One Pitch, and it's called Coffee with a Journalist. It's a marketing company, and we're sort of talking about some PR stuff and a little bit of behind the scenes into the news business. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, it is available on all the major podcast platforms. You can just search for One Pitch, Coffee with a Journalist, and you'll see it there.
Okay, now let's get to some news, and we want to start with a story that kind of got buried in the news yesterday, and it's related to this still unanswered question of where COVID originated. All this time later, we actually do not have a definitive answer. Some newly released documents related to a U.S.-funded coronavirus research in China appear to contradict Dr. Fauci's repeated assurances that the federal government did not fund so-called gain-of-function research at that infamous lab in Wuhan. The documents obtained by The Intercept reveal two unpublished grant proposals from an American health organization funded by the NIH that was doing research into bat coronavirus in Wuhan. One proposal directs $600,000 for research designed to make bat viruses more infectious. And now Fauci has said under oath that this research did not qualify as gain of function.
So if you've heard this term gain of function being thrown around, what it basically means is it's a way to describe techniques that enhance a pathogen at the genetic level, right? Making it potentially more transmissible, more contagious. It's very controversial. It's a form of research that scientists do and have been doing for a long time to help test theories and find treatments for new diseases. In the United States, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, that's the organization led by Fauci under the NIH, they're the ones who oversee gain-of-function research wherever it's being done. Now, these documents that you just mentioned, Jill, make it, I think, pretty clear that when Fauci and others have been saying that the United States does not and did not support gain-of-function research in Wuhan, that was simply not true. It's pretty clear now that federal dollars were being spent in that way. Now, it doesn't go as far as explaining the origins of COVID. We still don't know. We may never know whether it came from that wet market, whether it accidentally escaped that lab, whether it came from somewhere else. But you do have to ask a question here about why this kind of research is being done, period. Right? I mean, to me, as a layman, it seems like a recipe for disaster, tinkering with virus genomes, right? It's like that kind of playing God stuff. It just sort of, it makes me feel a little icky. Now, gain-of-function supporters say that it provides all these benefits. It can potentially make vaccines before you need them. It can just let them know more about these pathogens before they come out into the open environment. But I haven't seen anybody point to any specific vaccines that came from gain-of-function or specific pathogens that were brought under control by gain-of-function research. If anybody else has, by all means, let me know. Right.
So to your point, so there's this group of scientists that think this is the best way to eventually prevent a pandemic. Because in theory, the idea is let's stay ahead of the virus. Okay, and then try to come up with treatments and ways to combat that virus and the pandemic. Dr. Fauci is one of those scientists. He is in charge of the NIH budget. And in fact, even post-COVID or, post the start of the pandemic, he is calling for the U.S. to send even more money to Wuhan for this type of research. Okay, if you are interested in this topic or just the origin of COVID or China's role in covering up the early part of the pandemic, and even perhaps what's happening with the pandemic right now in that country, I highly recommend listening to Bari Weiss's podcast. It's called Honestly. She is a former New York Times and Wall Street Journal op-ed columnist and reporter. So she brings on Josh Rogan, who literally wrote the book about all of this and happened to just be researching China while the pandemic started. He is, if you're, so part of this came to light, if you remember, because there was this kind of public tiff between Rand Paul and Anthony Fauci.
Right.
Okay, so if you may have seen the soundbite, it got a lot of play on cable news because they kind of like have this beef with each other, I guess.
Yeah.
Rogan is the journalist who came out and said, I hate to tell you, but Rand Paul is right here. And Dr. Fauci is wrong in terms of what was going on in Wuhan, quote unquote, gain of function, and is the U.S. funding it? And part of the issue that Rogan explains in the podcast is that Fauci himself helped write the definition of what is gain of function so that basically what we were doing in China would not fit under that definition. So that way he's not going to get sued or he's not lying on. Exactly. Yeah. But isn't the point here that we should actually know how American taxpayer money is being where taxpayer money is going, especially in light of a pandemic? Now, I've listened to this podcast twice, okay?
Look at you.
And because it is so fascinating, and I will say it's a little wonky, and I listen in the car, and I have found myself where I'll I'll kind of drift off and think about something else, and then I'll go back and I'll re-listen. There are so many tidbits that I wanted to mention and so many just takeaways that I had. One thing that I just thought was fascinating and I want to mention, and you'll remember early on in the pandemic, the Trump administration was going and saying that they thought it potentially could come from a lab. And journalists from mainstream media were basically like, it came from the wet market. There's no way it came from the lab. So how did that happen? Well, the journalists are relying on their sources in the scientific community, many of whom are very tied to this type of gain of function research, okay? So if it came from the lab, it would basically kind of end any of their research projects. So they had this vested interest in sort of squashing the lab leak theory. And journalists have sources that they go to, and if a journalist has never really lied to, if a source has never really lied to you before, or they've always been a good source, then you believe them, and that's who you go to. And versus the Trump administration, who's been hostile with the media, so the inclination was to believe these scientists. And if you remember, the Trump administration, who came out originally to talk about the lab leak theory, they kind of stopped talking about it. And according to Rogan, one of the reasons is because China said, cut it out, or we are not going to send you masks. Because they make the masks. Remember how desperate we were early on. Think about March, April 2020, where we just literally didn't have N95 masks or even just regular disposable masks. So I highly recommend it. It's just fascinating stuff at kind of how the media got it wrong. And look, and Rogan's not saying it came from the lab, but his point is it is a credible theory and one that should be looked at. And you just won't believe kind of what went on with China, especially in the early days. Anyway.
Well,
my
I'm
endorsement.
going to listen to that today. I don't want to spend any more time on this, but just I think what happens with these stories is like we're so polarized, right? That you see this and you see Rand Paul's name. I mean, Rand Paul is a complete blowhard. He's probably like the most annoying person in the Senate. So you hear that like I did, and I was like, ugh, I don't care what he has to say. Like I don't believe anything he says. And then on the other side, it's like Fauci is this sort of like God amongst men who is running the whole show, and he's this like liberal icon. Well, no, everything is more complicated than that, right? And I'm not Fauci by all accounts, a good, hardworking government bureaucrat who's been in public service his entire life. But that doesn't mean that he's this sort of like unassailable figure. Right? A lot of people got a lot of stuff wrong in the beginning, and we need to understand that so that we can prevent this from happening again.
And that's sort of Rogan's takeaway too. Is like, he's not like Fauci's a terrible person. He's saying he in his heart of hearts probably thinks that this type of research is the key to stopping pandemics. Rogan more points to China and just saying, we just can't trust them. All right, Carlo, let's move on to another overseas situation here. The Taliban announcing an interim government for Afghanistan that includes all men and at least one high-ranking member of an American-designated terrorist organization. So this is going to make it effectively impossible for the U.S. or other Western countries to recognize the Taliban. And it's a sign that the group is not planning to form that inclusive or unity government that had been promised. Shocker.
Oh, I hate when the Taliban lies like that. Taliban fighter. I'm sorry to joke, man. I'm just glad this isn't our problem anymore, at least for now. Taliban fighters also violently putting down at least 2 pockets of protest in Kabul over the last few days that had actually been led by women who were trying to have a say in the new government. So you get these little flickers of dissent, and they've just been put down as expected, I guess. So look, meet the new Taliban, same as the old. I still think they're going to have to moderate somewhat if they want to actually govern, because they don't have the infrastructure or the capacity to actually turn that country into anything unless they have some sort of foreign aid coming in. Just in terms of also recommendations, I just finished this documentary on Netflix called Turning Points, 5-part series, sort of about 9/11 and everything that came afterwards. It does, if you didn't really live through 9/11, or if you lived through it and you were younger and don't really remember it, it does a very good job, I think, a very even-handed job of showing all the various threads from that day and what went wrong, specifically in Afghanistan. So I would recommend that. It's on Netflix now.
I cannot wait actually to watch that, and it is kind of crazy. We're just a few days away from the 20th anniversary, and this is horrible timing. But I don't know if you just saw me like do sort of this double take. There is a window washer. I hear this loud, the thoughts of 9/11 and like and just the scariness of safety and security. I keep hearing this like squeaking and I don't even know what the noise is. And then I just heard music blasting, and I turned around, and there's actually a window washer right outside. So I don't even know if you could pick it up on the microphone, because he must be just like good for him, by the way. Blast your music, clean the windows, enjoy.
I always thought that'd be a great job. You're up there. I mean, it'd be scary, but you're up there, out in the world. No one's bothering you. You're doing your job. You got a great view. Anyway.
Okay, a shocking abortion decision out of Latin America. Mexico's Supreme Court has ruled unanimously that it was unconstitutional to criminalize abortion, setting the stage for the nationwide legalization of the procedure. Mexico becomes the most populous country in Latin America to decriminalize abortions, coming after a sustained Mexican women's movement that helped turn public opinion in the world's second largest Catholic country.
That's the key. This is huge for that reason. Abortion's still illegal in most of Latin America, though that is starting to shift now. And the first thing I thought of when I saw this come across the wire yesterday is this bizarre thought, this prospect of Texas women having to cross the border into Mexico to get a legal abortion, which is something that now is plausible and probably likely. Also, on a completely unrelated note, but I just wanted to mention, since we're talking about Mexico, there was a pretty significant earthquake last night, 7.0 right off of the coast of Acapulco. Pretty severe damage and lots of power outages as far away as Mexico City. There was a tsunami warning overnight, but that has been lifted. So just if you see those alerts as you wake up, it looks like there's no longer a tsunami threat.
Sticking in Latin America, El Salvador has officially adopted Bitcoin as legal currency, the first country to do so, and a landmark moment for the legitimization of cryptocurrencies. The rollout, though, is a bit rocky, with the government briefly shutting down its official Bitcoin app because of technical glitches.
Yeah, so the price of Bitcoin also fell about 10%, even more than 10% yesterday. It was about 50,000, then it fell below 43,000 as this was happening. Some of the major exchanges like Coinbase were also hit with tech issues. We can't go deeply into crypto here again, but I remain a crypto skeptic. I appreciate everybody who has sent me things about why I shouldn't be. I, at least with this, can see sort of the prospect here. El Salvador is a country where 70% of the population is unbanked. So the theory is that crypto could help sort of lower some of the barriers to entry for those people. The problem is you have to wonder how many of the world's unbanked are also smartphone and internet enabled. And that's a genuine question. I don't know the answer to that, but you would suspect that a lot of them also don't have smartphones or internet access. Not to mention a lot of Salvadorians just don't really want anything to do with being these sort of crypto guinea pigs. But definitely something to watch as Bitcoin does gain more legitimacy around the world.
And quickly want to mention Britney Spears' father officially filed to end the conservatorship that controls his daughter's life. In a petition to the court, Jamie Spears' legal team wrote that Britney, quote, is entitled to have this court now seriously consider whether this conservatorship is no longer required. Britney herself has not formally filed to end the conservatorship. She did ask the judge to remove her father as the guardian of her estate.
This is the first time that the old man, Jamie Spears, has said that the conservatorship should end. That's sort of the notable thing here. Last month, he said, you'll remember, that he was willing to step down at the appropriate time. This is him, I think, finally throwing in the towel here. So there's a court hearing at the end of this month that should probably, I suspect, end this whole mishigash once and for all for Britney. Is that the right use of that word?
Yeah, maybe. It's as you said it. I did a double take because I like a little on Rosh Hashanah, Carlo Versano throwing in a little Yiddish.
Right?
Much
why
appreciated.
Not, right?
Okay, and I feel like we spend so much time on the China story, but it is so important. I think because
I agree completely.
This is the story. Like 9/11, I think really was the story, I think, for us in our generation of our childhood. The pandemic is the next story that's going to shape so many lives. And I think about my daughter, and I had this discussion, I know we have to go with a friend of mine the other day, and we're like, we don't know how their lives are going to be changed by the pandemic in terms of masking and just school and everything like that. So we need to know how things went so horribly wrong.
Yeah, and the response to it and all of that is completely true. It is. COVID is the watershed moment for this generation. It will be life before COVID and life after, and it's our responsibility in the media to try and understand exactly what you said, Jill.
All right, that is what you need to know for Wednesday, September 8th. And a happy Rosh Hashanah to everyone out there who celebrates. Happy New Year.
Shana Tova, guys, and see you guys tomorrow. Good to be back, Jill.